I'm going to talk about RBD constraints, different types of constraints, and different type of procedural kind of ways of connecting RBD pieces together. So what is RBD? RBD stands for rigid body dynamics. It's when we break things apart and simulate alongside that. So let's say you have, so let's see it from side view. You have a structure, and this structure is cracked, right? It's shattered into pieces. So this is your structure, and there are three ways to keep these pieces together. One is, so one way is just to glue these pieces together, or cement them together, like some sort of a glue, like the bricks in the wall, they are all glued together. So this is called glue constraint. How this one works? We give direction to the simulation brain or solver that how strong it is, and if any force would be stronger than your glue, will piece out, will separate the pieces from each other. So, but this is like very basic way of connecting things together. Sometimes, like in the actual wall behind you, or in the construction work, you use bars, metal bars. So let's say to reinforce the concrete, we use metal bars inside these structures, and when the structure tries to break apart, these metal bars fight back, and they just don't let this to happen. So we call these hard constraints. Whenever you hear the word hard constraint, well, there's plenty of other uses for that, but whenever you hear that, you remember the metal bars to reinforce the concrete. Sometimes you use soft tissues within your structure. So let's say these walls, many of them, these are not concrete walls. These are behind us. These are I think they are composite plaster walls. So there are some kind of a soft tissue inside that, like a piece of cloth within them. So these piece of cloth, when we inject force, these piece of kind of fabric or cloth, these soft holders, they try to hold the structure together. We call them soft constraints. You will see that these soft constraints can be used for us to, let's say, you hammer a piece of metal. That piece of the metal doesn't break into pieces. It just dent, right? So we use soft constraint to kind of create that kind of effect. So let's look at, let's start with a very basic simulation. Let's say we have, start with a GO. I name this glue constraints example. So let's create a box. Let's say that the center of the box is a relative reference to its size. So whenever I grab and want to resize it, I always remain on the surface. So let's go for a wide piece of geometry. So let's say this is like a piece of, I don't know, something. So in this case, let's say concrete. So I'm gonna call this concrete on the surface, and then we have a sphere, hit on it and break it into pieces. So this sphere like kind of moves, transforms up, like I add a transform node to animate it. So it comes and hits the surface, maybe harder, and then goes back. So basically this is the animation of it. If I play it in real time, maybe faster. So I just hold shift and middle click, drag them slightly further forward. Yeah. So let's break that into pieces. RBD material fracture is your friend. It's a complicated node of different, like kind of, it does a lot of different tasks for you all at once. So if you, like previously, like before the introduction of this RBD material fracture, we used to use Voronoi fracture for fracturing our geometry. Actually, if you double click on this, at the heart of this, you will see a Voronoi fracture. Control B for enlarging a pane, a panel. So at the heart of it, you see like some sort of a Voronoi fracture somewhere. I don't know where it is, but it's somewhere here. That's, yeah, this is, I think, no, that's RBD cluster, RBD packing. Anyway, there's still, so it's still like at the heart of it is still a Voronoi fracture, but it's like a more refined and like kind of accessible Voronoi fracture for us. Okay. So it fractured it into pieces. You know, like sometimes you want to art direct your fracturing. So let's say I want to, like when this, like let me just template this ball. I want this ball, when it balls this hit here, like I want to see that beautiful round fracturing patterns on this. So maybe like I create a cylinder or tube. Actually, we can create a circle. No, not a circle, disc. I don't know if there is something to create a disc. No, there isn't. So I use the cylinder or tube. And then let's make it larger. Scale it up and bring it up. So I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to add end caps to it. But I want those round shape on the caps. No. Maybe I should use a tube primitive instead. Was that one giving me some? Interesting. So then I just use I just wanted those round shapes. Maybe just like the sphere is not that bad. Sphere itself, actually I can use the same sphere. So I have a sphere here. I can use the same sphere with another transform node for shaping. So I just make it larger. and very much scaled down on y. So this is like kind of a pattern that I'm looking for. So I just turn this into like, so that's a geometry, but you need points. So I use an add node that says delete geometry, but keep the points. So the points are here. These are the points that I'm going to use for shattering my you know, the concrete. But also I just jitter these points, so point jitter, you see them? So you just like add a bit of chaos, so we don't want them to be so orderly. So that's a lot of points. We might not need that many. So what I do is I go here and I say that I want a less complicated you know, maybe I want a less complicated sphere, so I don't want that many points in the space. Also, the point jitter might like want it less. Let's use that and see how it works. And then, so this is our fracture. We just say that, hey, you just use these points. If I hover on the inputs, one of the inputs says extra Voronoi points, and I just feed that inside. So, and then here I should say that use those inputs. Before using these inputs, let me just press escape, and then I just delete one of these. So I'm going to show you what happens. So how this fracturing works. So this one like fractures this geometry into 5 pieces, and each one of these 5 then is fractured into another 5. See? So I always suggest that you just start with one layer of fracturing, feed your input points to it, and then I say that, okay, so you see that like suddenly I get a lot of nice fractures on top. So maybe let's go for 20. Yeah, I get fracturing all through. Then I can fracture these ones even further with one another layer. That's so this first layer was using input points. The second layer can use the input points too. Then you get another extra layer of complexity here. We just have to wait. Yes. So you see that like there's a lot of like fracturing happening on top of here. It might look too much, but that's okay. So now if we run a basic, let's run a basic simulation and then start to set up our glue constraints. So what I just want to do now is just to run a solver, RBD bullet solver, and let's see what's happening. This RBD bullet solver solves everything, so everything drops without anything because there's no ground and anything. There's no collision defined as well. So I just press P. Again, if you remember, I like to close this down. This is just too cluttered for me. I like a nice and neat node tree. And whenever I need parameters, press P. So that's a little bit more convenient for me. Just say in the collisions a ground plane, and also we have another collision, which is this geometry inside collision geometry as a deforming geometry. So you will see it there. So like when we run it, so it hits that part and comes back. So the strength of these pieces, how they hold tight to each other, is, so you see that some pieces break apart. By the way, if they look ugly and laser cut, because I didn't turn on edge detail on purpose, because I wanted a faster kind of simulation and also faster, just for the purpose of teaching. But for yourself, you just like make your pieces to look as nice as possible. So if you see that this like main piece in the middle holds its shape as strong as possible, and that's the glue constraint. So any RBD material you create by default creates a glue constraint by default. So you see here, like if I go to the constraint, it says it's glue. You can't like delete this and type hard, and you get a different result. If I do that, I don't see a hard constraint in action as easy as that. It needs a bit of fiddling around. So, and this glue constraint strength is like 10,000 units, whatever it might be. I suggest you to have a constraint, RBD constraint, or RBD constraint properties separately added to have a kind of an oversight. So like you bring out your constraint control out of this network. So then you control that. Let's have a look at what are these three links. We have seen it, we have used it, but we might not have understood it. So the first link, the first output, let me just add a null here. The first output is basically your geometry. It says RBD, like kind of a geometry output. The last one is also a geometry node, but it's a low quality geometry. So this one, for me, low quality and high quality is the same. But if I have used like kind of edge detail and all sorts of things, this would have been different. So this is a low-res geometry, which we call it proxy geometry. This one is a like kind of high-res geometry. What is the middle one, the pink one? The pink one is your constraint. So it's, oh, sorry. I just want to add a null here, and I say that this pink one, maybe I color this to pink as well. Just press C and color it. So this one is constraint. So like if I click on that, you see that, oh, this is the network of these pieces connecting together. So these information previously, before this kind of complicated like setups, we should have gone through all of this individually. So node structures were complicated. Now these like kind of complicated nodes give a simpler network to us, which is more convenient to work with. So now we have a simulation here that has everything in it, including glue constraints. So if I make this one, let's make this one very loose. So I'm gonna move these three away, but I need them. So I keep them. Let me just hold Y and disconnect. I keep them here, but I need them. So let me just make this constraint so weak, like 1. So when I have such a weak constraint, even like pay attention to this shape, like especially like here. even before the geometry hits. The geometry hits now, right? And it's just like shatters this into like millions of pieces, not millions, but like that many pieces. Even before this shatters, it starts shattering by itself. Actually, the force of gravity, which exists inside this bullet solver, inside force, you see that there is gravity. I can turn it off, actually. Let's see if what happens without gravity. It hits this like a space element, so these pieces just go into the gravity-less world, scattering around. So this force of gravity which exists in this solver crumbles and like breaks the pieces even without the effect happening. So what you do is that you use another node called RBD configure. So things that I'm saying is shared among all the different type of constraints. So if I move, when I move to the hard and soft constraints, you will see the same kind of these constraint properties and constraint RBD configure in action too. So the thing that I'm looking for is slipping. So you say that, you know what, I know that this is a very fragile simulation. Things should be fragile. That's what I want, possibly. Not in case I'm just giving as an example. Things are fragile sometimes, so I just let them sleep on. And then, so they are sleeping, and they wait until gets triggered. So what you see is that they don't move. If I press W on keyboard, they don't move until the simulation begins, right? Also, sometimes this RBD configure is a very useful tool, because sometimes you want some of the pieces just to stay there and don't move at all. So let's say if you just come here and say group select and select some of these pieces. So you see that that's what I selected, and say active none. Actually, when I select these ones, I should press enter, so you see them inside here. So it says the selected ones are active, not. But also you see this sleeping applied. You might like worry that, oh, my sleeping configuration might not, I don't want this to be on this group, I want this separately. That's fine. So name this configure inactive pieces, add another configure for letting everything to be sleeping, not just a specific group, okay? And call it sleeping like sim. Or so now what's happened is that it's sleeping. Let's make sure that it's sleeping. So I just want to like pay attention to the detail. So you see that nothing happens. Yes. Until like it just like gets so close to the surface. So I see a bit of like kind of tension happening here, and like kind of glue constant starts to break, to lose their strength. So it hits, and the part that I made them inactive, they remain. Okay. My favorite way of creating inactive areas is not by the group. So I delete that group. Again, thinking procedurally, it has nothing to do with Houdini. It has something to do with the way you work. So the first question, the first concept that comes into my mind is that if I have this group, what if I go back and I change the structure of my fracturing? I change my model. Like, what if that would happen? So like, I use this, like, because this piece numbering works based on these numbers, right? These numbers will change. So then instead of like a group, which I just delete, I use a bounded area. So I add another box here. I call it bound. Let's template this, and then I make this box to cover an area. Actually, let's make it large. So, come on. So this is my inactive area. If you want an inactive area, let's go back to our simulation. Let's template this bound. So you see that area over there? I just want to say that, hey, this is the area that is supposed to be. It could be any shape. It could be a sphere. It could be anything. So I just then I pop this into like static bound geometry input of my inactive pieces, and I say that use bound. So it basically uses these bounds. You can visualize that somewhere. There is a visualization active area. If I press W, you see that? Okay, so this is active areas. So if I click on that, actually you can even see better. If I grab my bound and if I move it up, you see the areas that are active. So you see that this is like a very much a procedural way. It's not dependent on the names of each point on it. So, okay, so that's a better way of building up like a procedural inactive area. So that was glue constraint. So I definitely don't want my glue constraint to be 1, like so loose, maybe just 100. And let's run the sim one more time. With 100 makes a better impact. Still is just like, it looks like a huge. So I want these pieces to like stick together stronger, like this piece. So there's one thing that one thing that helps me is, of course, this strength, maybe 5,000. And also, there's one thing here inside the constraints. You see the constraints. This is for soft and hard constraint, but your glue constraint can also follow some of these rules. Like, they break until they get positioned in a specific angle or something. But for now, I think this would do the job for us. So it holds like pieces together slightly better. I want a lot more. So I go here, I make it like 50,000. 10 times stronger. I should click on this. Yeah. So that makes more sense to me. It looks like a very stiff concrete that has been hit. So concrete is strong, so this is much more reasonable. Okay. So that was glue constraints example. Let's go and create a duplicate this one. So it starts to just like create all of those fracture and everything. So I just press escape on my keyboard because I would do a lot of things. Again, escape on my keyboard. Maybe I just turn off the brain for a while. And also say do not update. I updated manually myself, like by pressing this. So it gives me some chance to work better. So instead of concrete, I use a ground. Oh, actually, let's work on a concrete that has like kind of this, as I explained here, this kind of black hard bar inside, sort of like a very solid like structure inside. So it's not glued or cemented. So these pieces like structured together. Actually, I'm going to turn this one and this one on so that we just see the same kind of structure, but treat it in a different way. So this time I want to reinforce my concrete with some internal structure. Those internal structures called glue constraints. So let me tidy up my network. Always do that. So this is not that one, but this one. This is collision GO. This is extra points, and this is configure RBD, and that's our solver. And okay, so let's go. This is our concrete, right? It's already shattered, and it has. Okay. I delete this RBD constraint properties. I want to create one more. So if you remember, this middle one is a constraint, right? Actually, let me just delete these two. The first one is the high-res geometry. The last one is low-res, which we call proxy. So for hard constraints, we need points instead of, if I click on this eye here, what's happening? So that's RBD material, and this is, let me just say that hi other objects. So I forgot to put this onto the auto update, so it just updates everything as we move. Okay, so these are constraints between pieces. So each one of these lines, it says that, let's say, this piece is connected to the other piece. But we're going to create our own constraints style. So what I do is that I just want to turn these like kind of lines into points. As I said, hard constraint needs points. So I just so these are like connected lines together. So I just disconnect them from each other with this facet node, and I say that unique points. So each one of these lines are not sharing points with each other, but has 2 points overlapping on each other. Then I can change each line, change the size of each line individually by primitive attributes. So say do transform. If you see, if I start like scaling them down, these lines start to scale down. But I scale down up to 0. You just say that, oh, where they gone? So let's go to, oh, no rotation. Rotation 0, 0, 0. Even scale 0, 0, 0. And so where they are gone, they are there, but like as points. So if I turn this on, you see that hard surfaces points are there. So they are there, they're functioning. So now I would say that constraints properties, RBD constraint properties, this time I would say that these are hard constraints. So then the story is different. So like then so you see that my constraint line, I just build up my own one, and it just passes through this line. Then I would feed that back into my kind of network. So you see that I kind of manipulated my constraint on the way. What's that error? Says no constant geometry. I know what's happening. There must be. So we possibly may need an. So the constraint, guys, applies on an attribute called name. If I go to the spreadsheet geometry, there is a name attribute here, actually. There is name attribute. So why this one says no constraint geometry? Give me a second. Actually, we might not need this constraint properties, or do we need it?
So under this material fracture, let's set this to hard.
Okay, so I should have mentioned that. So the issue here was that so we have these lines. These are constraints, and they are hard constraints, of course. Then I turn them into points using these two nodes. Then I feed that into my simulation. Then inside my simulation, I would say that I'm going to use, there is a constraint part, which is hard constraints. Slipping seam, and that one is. Okay, not sure about that solver, so I just created a new solver with the collision geometry. So I can't get rid of that solver. Actually, this could be like hard surface solver. So for this one, we have inside the collision, let me just put that into what we had. So inside the constraint, so we have some constraint names and some attributes here that can be controlled. Before carrying on this, I would say I go to the advanced, and inside the hard constraints, I set the rest length to 0. Let me just not set it in 0, so you see the effect, what would happen. So this is what we have, which is hard constraint. When I play, it starts just like it's sleeping. So look at the interesting shape that it just gave us. So it hits the construction. Look at that. But the rest, so it just gets like trapped into like these, like kind of these work like a internal shape that construction or internal structure that tries to hold this shape together. So sometimes they function abruptly. That's why I set the reason that we set the rest length to 0 is that because our primitive length for these points are 0. So we want this to be like not doing anything at time, like at the beginning. So then we start to just like see like a more rational behavior. So it just doesn't like pop out. So look at the behavior of the structure. It looks like trying to hold its shape. So if bang, and then it tries to hold its shape back. So it doesn't look that natural. You want it to function as an internal structure, but breaking at some point anyway. So if you go to the constraints, you see that the distance threshold is on. I turn that off. I turn on angle threshold. And I would say that, you know what, whatever piece that gets like about, I don't know, 20% angled, like is getting rotated, then it's time for the constraint to break apart, to just like. So we see that the pieces that don't move much don't break apart. But the pieces that move much, like that one, you see that one, these ones, they move a lot. So the constraint breaks. So it holds its shape, but not much. Let me just flip book this one. So you guys maybe up to frame just 60 is enough. Because I want to talk about those pieces that just like round and round, and so that they carry on the like kind of some crazy behavior. So let the simulation run. I'm going to talk about these pieces that fall on the ground and just jitter and like dance around. So let's play this one. If you grab one of these, some of them like have a bit of like extra behavior. I should have run it a little bit more. But you know, at least you guys can see that, like, especially like look at here how the structure like holds back its shape. So it's a hard constraints. So for those pieces that like go crazy and like they just drop on the ground and just like jitter and dance in an unnatural way, we have some force. Inside force, you can add drag. You can add drag spin and increase these numbers to get a better result. Okay, so I just like save this and then I duplicate that. So that was a hard constraint example. I create a soft constraint example now out of the same one. So let's get inside. Let's run it. Okay, so now I talked about like soft constraints are the softer, more malleable internal structures. Some might translate it as some fabrics within the structure, but also you can translate it as metal. Metal, the particles are like kind of, so if this would be like your two particles in a metal, right? If a force hits the concrete, like these particles suddenly like lose their connection and they just run away from each other. But the metal, so this is T1. In T2, like maybe after the force is applied, they could still hold the shape in a new condition. So that's why when you hit your car to a, like you're a learner driver, you hit your car to a tree, the bumper, which is plastic, breaks apart, but the door like bends or dents because metal tries to hold its shape. What if you say that, you know what, this is a big metal piece, like let's say an aluminum piece, and I want it to be dented instead of kind of broken into pieces. So then I would so it's not concrete anymore, it's metal. And let's wait until, again, changing name is, so it just runs through all of that to change every piece name. Anyway, so now here that I say that this is supposed to be a hard constraint, I say it is a soft constraint, okay? A soft constraint with, and also inside here, in the way that the constraint breaks apart, actually I go back to the distance threshold, and I look. Well, let's see what would soft constraint look like. So let's run this and look at the result first. So as you can see, the soft constraint works in a very interesting way. These like internal constructions work as a sort of a like a rubber structure, and try to hold the structure together. So I'm going to go back and make this initial structure very complicated, because I want to use it for, like, let's say 50, 50, and 50. And 50. So nothing still changes in the way it behaves. I want to make the distance threshold. First of all, I want to make the soft inside advanced in the soft. Also, the rest length for the soft 0 as well. So it holds its rest position to the 0. So you see that it just like holds its shape. And I don't want them to come back. So instead of distance threshold, which like tells them not, I might use angle threshold, but a very high angle. I don't know. I just experiment with that. So I want them to like change shape. This is not going to be metal, guys, by the way. But not, it will turn into metal. Maybe I just go back to the distance threshold, but lower. I don't want things to bounce back. The way to do that is, what about force threshold? Force 1. Oh, no, of course not. Let me show you how. So I'm going to build up my network of a metal deformation, and then, and then come back to massage numbers and see what we get. So for metal deformation, we have this metal initial shape. This is the initial shape. It went through some deformation. Let me just go to a deformed state. Well, points. So this is the beauty of understanding how Houdini functions. So we have a bunch of points on this surface that has moved around, right? I can say that use as a point deform. So we have a very interesting node which we use very much. It's called point deform. This point deform says I've got a initial object, mesh to deform. I want to deform this mesh based on these points that are going around. So then I use the deform shaped, which is if I hover on the inputs, the first one says deformed point lattice, which is of course this one. The second one says rest point lattice, which means that how this lattice, how this point deforms would look like at when they are at rest. So I use a time shift here, and I say that because at time 1 they are at rest, right? So if I press P, I just like hold Control and Shift and click here. So it says that my rest time or rest shape is like this when they are at time 1. So then when we are like here, so the geometry that we have, that geometry, so the points of this geometry, this one, are following the shape of this lattice or this like deformed geometry to deform this geometry. This looks a bit awkward, so I start with working with radius and things like that. And maybe a little bit more of, yeah, like something like that. This is doing much better. So if it hits it, but this is the part that I have to work on it. I like the way it gets deformed. I don't like the way it just comes back. It's just like a jelly now. So, we know how to make a jelly now. But I want them to be deformed and stay there. Remain deformed. So there are few things I can look at. Possibly I should here say that it's only a soft deformer, so hard deformer is not in action. So I delete the hard deformer, go back. Because hard deformer is the one that like fiercely tries to bring back the structure. No, still the soft deformer is in action inside. Oh, stiffness. Oh, found it. So, and also damping. So these two are the golden numbers for the soft deformers. For hard deformer is only this rest length and also this constraint force mixing, which we rarely adjust. But soft constraint has these two very important attributes. Stiffness, I want this to be much stiffer, like 10 times stiffer, and 10 times damper, which means that when they get shaped, the shape doesn't come back to its final look. So let's run this. Go hit it. Still comes back. Oh, what's that? Maybe I lower down the stiffness, but a lot of damping. Go back to frame 1, always when you change numbers. Okay, these numbers seem to work, 5 and 1,000. So let's say if we look at it, just hits and it just like it remains the shape. Still, I'm not happy about that because there's still a bit of like movement at the end of it. I would prefer that like it just like hits and then remains very solid and constant. Again, but like that's the way it is. So you carry on and you play with those numbers until you get what you're looking for. So these are 3 types of constraints inside Houdini.